guys, welcome back to another episode of the CDP Growth Show. On today's episode, I'm joined by Jamie, who is the current CRO of UserZoom. Jamie, how you doing?
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, of course. Now, Jamie, before we dive straight into the the main part of the podcast, just give my audience like a really quick 30-second rundown of, first of all, what UserZoom is as a platform, and then really who you guys kind of serve.
Sure. So UserZoom is a enterprise grade SaaS software platform that lets companies conduct and manage and measure their UX, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone's these days talking about design thinking and user-driven economies and things of that nature, and that's what the platform allows companies to do. Typically, we sell into kind of design organizations, products organizations, and UX research organizations. So.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. And I know you've kind of come from more of the kind of sales, kind of SaaS background. So I'd be really interested to kind of hear about how you how you initially joined UserZoom, but really just kind of how you've got to where you are now in terms of, the companies that you've previously worked with, and just really kind of your kind of sales background in SaaS.
Sure. So it actually probably started before I was involved in SaaS, where I was actually involved in running a digital marketing agency for a long time. So even though I've been involved in sales for whatever reason, it's always been very close to marketing of one thing or another. And so I joined UserZoom 6 years ago now, if you can believe it.
Wow. Okay.
Feels a long time. It's a long time in SaaS anyway. Yeah. And great product, great space, fantastic customers. A lot of the biggest brands in the world are customers, and so it was just a really exciting opportunity. And so I joined all that time ago, initially to head up UK and then Europe, and then eventually I became a couple of years ago CRO. So in terms of my journey towards marketing, I've always chosen to work super closely with the marketing team or department or leadership, even if they're not reporting to me. Sometimes I've managed them, sometimes I haven't. In UserZoom, I didn't for quite a while. And I just believe that's the best way to get the best out of your entire funnel, really, from all the way to the very, very early things that marketing do around education and bringing prospects to the organization, right the way then through actually the sales process. And so I guess the natural continuation from that eventually was about a year ago now, we took the decision to just double down on that alignment and bring marketing under me, and it's working really well.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I think that kind of role of and again, I'd be interested to kind of get your perspective around the kind of chief revenue officer, that kind of CRO, because I think it has become quite a popular role now with a lot of B2B SaaS companies. We've traditionally always had the CMO and then the head of sales or the director of sales, and now I feel like we're kind of having that alignment in the middle with with roles like the CRO and head of growth. Companies use different kind of terms and acronyms. But I'd be interested to see, just I think, your perspective on the importance of having like a CRO that kind of sits in the middle, and just really how it can really benefit a company.
I mean, I think at first it's probably important to say that I don't think there's any one right way.
Yeah, of course.
And that's, I think, the challenge in SaaS in general is figuring out, what's going to work for your organization.
Yeah.
And what I'd also say is your company size and stage has probably also got a lot to do with that.
Of course,
And so, it can be an interesting journey about how organizations morph. So, for example, our marketing leader and some of the team that we have today, we actually hired them when we acquired a company, and it was their marketing team. And so it can be different for every time. Why I think the CRO position works really, really well for us is it straddles the three things that we really need for our business, right? Which is high touch, high value, kind of thought leadership driven marketing in an emerging space where that's needed. Very, again, high touch hopefully high quality sales process for our prospects and customers to engage with, and then that kind of post sale account management. So yeah, I think I think it's working. Obviously, perhaps I'm a bit biased, but yeah, and so I think there are definite benefits to it, and companies have just kind of got to figure it out. I think one of the other considerations sometimes is what's the strength profile of your CEO, and how many direct reports do they want and need, and things like that. So if they're super strong in right, yes, if they're super strong in marketing, they may want to own that, right? Not want to put it under a CRO. If they or if they're happy with 2 reports and for whatever reason they feel that serves that need. But then as companies grow, so does the number of direct reports for a CEO, and that's when it starts to.
Yeah, so it's really based off, again, how your company's structured. Like you said, if the CEO is kind of the marketing leader, the marketing guy, then you structure it in different ways, right? It's fully dependent on how the company's structured.
And then the last consideration is just the chief sales officer or chief revenue officer, their skill sets and their appetite.
Of course,
some people might take the view that look, I don't know anything about marketing, I'm happy to be the customer of it, but I don't want to own it. I've got a lot on my plate from a sales perspective. So again, that's another consideration.
And I know you guys, obviously, kind of prior to this call, you mentioned that you've kind of always been a very kind of outbound driven kind of company, but I know you're starting over the last few years to kind of ramp up the inbound side, and kind of in terms of implementing that program. So I'd be really interested to hear, and I think it'd be interesting for the audience maybe who have traditionally been very outbound driven and they're only starting to really kind of explore the inbound side, or kind of ABM like side. So I'd be interested to hear how you've kind of implemented that inbound, and how you've approached it, because there's so many ways you can approach inbound.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things about SaaS is that it's disruptive in nature, and so sometimes when you're disrupting an industry, there's not many people searching or looking for what you do. They don't know about the problem necessarily that they've got, or they don't think about it in those terms. And so initially, marketing tends to not necessarily be about traffic acquisition. It tends to be around supporting the argument that the salesperson might be trying to make on, why their tech should be considered and how to maybe reframe a particular problem. And so, which is why product marketing, of course, can be so powerful. So in terms of our journey, we've always had our marketing department, and that was focused typically and traditionally around kind of 2 things, really: webinars and physical events. We've always done a physical event of a sort, of a type. But as you said, really, probably 2 or 3 years ago, we really started to ramp how we approached our marketing as we got more sophisticated as an organization, and as the market got bigger. So I think so the way we developed now is, again, we go for a content generation machine, really, around all the aspects of UX and design and UX and research, and how companies might want to think about managing their digital products and producing their digital products, and that's what's driven largely a lot of our inbound. And we've gone from probably, certainly at my time, where marketing maybe only drove 5 or 10% of the kind of leads that the SQL leads. Now we're probably closer to 30-35. Again, we operate in a number of different markets internationally. We've got offices in Spain and the UK and America. So in America, we found a very high number of inbound leads, quality inbound leads. It's the most mature of our markets. UK is probably second, and then Europe, but mainland Europe's kind of a third.
And again, from your perspective, do you think that an inbound program can really only be successful when you have got that kind of more mature market, in terms of the market understands the product, that there's already been that adoption? Or do you think it's just about how you approach it?
I think there's a reason why we started with a lot of webinars and events, right? So it's still marketing, and that's ultimately still driving inbound. But it's around that kind of education piece. And I guess it's like anything, it's a case of try, test, and learn. Fundamental principle of UX. And the same is true of any inbound program.
Yeah, I think particularly when you're in that kind of early adoption of the market, you're doing things like webinars and maybe not so much focusing on the SEO side and really being that kind of educational thought leader within your market is particularly important when you're in that kind of early stage of the market. So yeah, I think, like you said, are you guys quite big on webinars, particularly during times like now? Are you actively pushing out quite a lot of webinars with obviously live events not being possible? And
yeah, I mean, we've always had a program of webinars running,
yeah,
but certainly the physical events have stopped right now.
got it.
So we have a kind of a sub brand called Better UX that was our physical event brand. And the last one we ran was last year in London, and that was about 300 people attended. So it's quite big. Well, given that we're not an Apple or a Google or whatever, and they were always great and really well received, and most of the points super effective, for lead generation and relationship strengthening. But so we're trying to figure out, like, can we do a version of that online, and if so, what might that might look like? Because I think if you just take a straight like 6-hour program of content and lectures and try and dump them online, I don't think that's going to work. So the marketing team are working away on what that might look like.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. And I guess I'd be interested to hear, particularly over the next few months, just with everything going on, how if you do see the space kind of changing in terms of, and this is not just over the next few months, but it's over the next few years, really. Like, do you think we're going to kind of go towards a more inbound kind of world, or do you kind of see the outbound world not being so much of an importance over the next few years, or do you how do you kind of just see, and this is just more of a generalized question, but how do you see the space kind of developing over the next few years, both on the outbound and inbound side?
This is a classic blog post, right? Like, outbound is dead, or inbound is dead, or SEO is dead. And generally, I think there's a strong case for both. Always. And I don't know why you would discount any channel. They both need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and pay for themselves, I guess, ultimately. But again, it's that mix as well, and also how many markets you want to be in and are in. So there's if there's other content out there that you can build around, that's usually then a good case for probably a high investment in inbound, because there's more conversation going on that you can build stuff around. Whereas certainly in our case, when we first entered the market, there was nothing about it. In fact, people were even, is remote UX even a thing? Was probably the only conversation going around, or is it this voodoo thing that that wasn't really thought about? Salesforce is a great example of an organization that pretty much invented a space, cloud-based CRM, and I bet they've done a lot of both inbound and outbound in their time, and still probably have strong channels on both.
Yeah, makes sense.
Both fronts, really.
Yeah, and obviously on that point of outbound and inbound and softwares, and I'd be again interested to hear how you've kind of built that. Obviously, the kind of main point of this podcast is really educating early stage founders about how to kind of structure and build out that MarTech and sales tech stack. So I'd be interested to hear how you've kind of built that tech stack out, and just really some of the key softwares from your perspective that have been really, really important to your growth over the last 6 years.
Yeah, so I think everybody starts usually with 2 things. They decide on a CRM. We went with Salesforce, fairly classic. And you decide on some kind of inbound email, platform. In our case, Marketo. And some people, try and combine the two. HubSpot famously, can provide, both elements. But I think most companies start there because you just need those things in place, or it's very difficult to operate and scale past a couple of people. But I also think, like most of the things, when you're starting out, you don't use those platforms particularly well, or maybe you've got a more natural affinity with one than the other. So we've acquired a few companies actually over the years, and it's a repeating formula. That even the companies that we acquire, they were like really strong on their Marketo, for example, if that's what they were using, and then not so strong on their CRM usage, or sometimes it's the other way around. And you just have to get good at both.
And what have been really, if we focus more on the inbound side first of all, what have been like particularly over the last few years, some of the softwares that you've implemented on the inbound side that have really kind of aided that growth?
Well, I think the first thing is it's not new software; it's actually integrating those two, and doing that in a smart way. I think that's the first probably big step that you need to take. It's not just about layering on more software; it's about connecting those two things together, one way or the other, right? And then you can start to operate with a little bit more sophistication. And then thereafter, it depends on what you're doing, but you start to invest in kind of software that then drives the kind of activities that you want, right? So be that retargeting, or be that software out there that creates squeeze pages if you're running a lot of pay-per-click, or it can kind of go around there. So for us, a recent example, a relatively recent example, is we took on a platform called Influitive. And Influitive's all around kind of referral marketing, and
interesting.
And generating communities, and because we have one now, we got a lot of customers all around the world, all trying to do UX, and so now we're of that size that becomes,
you can start to create that community.
Exactly that. So and then you kind of go from there, really. So on the marketing side, I'd say certainly Marketo, Engagio. We're lucky enough to deal with some of the biggest companies in the world, but some of these organizations are just vast, right? And so trying to market into the different areas and who's accessing what, Engagio became an important part of our tech stack to help us do that. On the sales side of things, we use Outreach, which drives a lot of our SDR activity. And we're starting to see some other interesting looking platforms out there. There's one called Bluebirds right now, which is taking a slightly different approach. We've not looked at it seriously yet, but I think at some point we will. And then just like a ton of small bits of software, right? So and it really is. It's around trying to create that ecosystem, and one of my tips is absolutely, if there's definitely a certain amount of software that if you start getting past that and you can't afford to invest in something like sales ops or marketing ops or biz ops, maybe don't, because you're just going to build a brittle. You just build a very brittle stack, and you don't really leverage the power out of that stack. And again, we're lucky enough to be at the size now whereby we actually have a VP of corporate IT and enterprise systems, and they've helped us sort of rationalize some of those perhaps idealistic decisions we took a couple of years back and never quite managed to get the value out of it that we needed. So because of our success of our inbound, one of the first pieces of software we needed to buy on the sales side then became Lean Data to route all the right, exactly, to and to do the routing, because we've got 8 SDRs in Europe, and we've got getting on for 20 odd in America, and so you can't just do round robin, or you've got to organize differently, and so that's what I was saying at the start of this call, really, which is dependent on the size and where you are on your scale journey. Hopefully you are scaling, then that's
determine the stack based off that.
Quite often.
Makes sense. And again, going back to that point you made of making that, like you said, if you can't invest in marketing ops, if you don't have the facilities to put that in place, don't, because the amount of startups that I see, I'm sure you do as well, where they've scaled far too quickly with a very, like you said, brittle, messy stack, which just creates so much confusion, and it becomes then a nightmare to try and integrate new softwares or build on top of that or replace the stack. And I think it's, you know, when you've got particularly, you know, a lot of tech companies now, they've got 25 different softwares that they're using just for marketing. So if you're not syncing the data correctly, if you're not, you know, fully maximizing the stack, you're going to run into problems as you start scaling. So I'd be interested to hear how you guys, I know you've kind of mentioned a few softwares like Engagio. Was it Lean Data you said that's been kind of that syncing tool? So I'd be interested to hear how you've really kind of fully maximized the stack and how you're just, I guess, making sure that you are kind of getting the most out of each software. Like, if you've got someone who validates the tools, like how are you kind of going about that? Because I'm sure
it's a really good question. It to some degree, it's a bit of a case of spinning plates, right? I think you have to, you know, maybe there's a future where we get every single platform we've got absolutely perfect, but but you know, that's probably not where we are today. And one of the things is, you know, software develops at such a fast pace these days. The capabilities of the stack that you acquire changes in a year and very 2 quickly. Years and so on and so forth. And so, you know, we do have a sales ops function that reports into me, which is vital, headed by a girl called Brittany, and she's just very good at keeping us honest. I think by our nature, just by our nature, salespeople and maybe less so marketing people, but you know, we're wowed by new things, and they're also quite positive and like, oh, let's you know, take it on, and and she's very good at like helping us, like, well, what are we trying to achieve? You know, I think, as somebody that's involved in selling software or running an organization that sells software, you know, I think there's probably two rules of software that stick in my mind. People buy software to solve problems, and software doesn't solve problems. And therein is the trickiness of why stacks sometimes fail or are brittle, because you have a problem in your mind, you see a great product and you think that's going to solve it, and actually it's the operationalizing of that stack, and you know, the processes you build around it, and the training that you provide your teams that actually quite often are the things that determine the difference between success and failure. So you know, in our SDR team, for example, you know, there's so many like small tools they use, you know, from sort of you know, email tracking type plugins and
tools.
There's a tool that we use called Crystal Knows, and it basically reads somebody's LinkedIn profile and offers up suggestions as to the kind of content that they might like, and whether they want detail or whether they want you know, perhaps more in depth, and there's all of this stuff, right? And then the bigger ones like Salesforce and LinkedIn Navigator and Outreach. And so what we've done is within our SDR teams, we've made an SDR a tech champion for a particular platform.
Makes sense.
And their job is to stay on top of the changes, attend the webinars, read the latest stuff, and then kind of socialize that back into the teams. Which has helped to a degree for us to stay on top of it. There's still always a need as a manager to, you know, dip in and out. So Outreach is a good example. So that's championed by one of our SDRs, and she's done a fantastic job of telling us what we need.
Keep on top.
It's gone in the queue for kind of, okay, we need to change the way it's configured, which is actually happening as we do this. But the overall SDR leader, she was saying to me, you know, she's been a little too far away from it, and she wants to, when she's got a little more time, really get into that next phase of optimization, and driving some more best practice in both the SDR groups.
I think it really all comes back down to kind of that accountability piece, and making sure that if you're going to implement a software, like you said, having that person that monitors it, that is you know, and I guess just really asking why, you know, why are we putting this software in place? Have we already got another software that can already do this? Because what you find a lot of the time is that either on the marketing or sales side, you put a software in place that HubSpot or, you know, Salesforce, they already offer that, you know, that feature or that process. So I think it's really, really important that you have them internal people that really do understand how the software works, and really how to get that full capability out of it before you just start switching lanes.
And it is tricky, because every software says they do more than probably what their core. And then kind of trying to unpick, like, well, do we want two pieces of software and accept that there's some degree of overlap, or or do we want to try and use it even if that's not its main strength? You know, and you know, more classically, you know, finance and corporate IT are you know, much more inclined to, we'll stick with that one system, and you know, make the compromise. And of course, the people in charge of that particular part of the business that's looking at it often want the specialist piece of kit to achieve their objectives, and that grey area, that overlaps, sometimes tricky to pick your way through.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, you know, we get like a lot of kind of early stage founders, you know, early stage marketing teams that are listening to this show. So I'd be really interested to hear just kind of your just advice. And obviously it's going to be different for each company because your tech stack, it develops so quickly, you know, as you're growing, it changes quite rapidly depending on the industry you're in. But I'd be interested just to hear kind of just I know you've already touched on some points, but just your kind of advice to a relatively, you know, new B2B SaaS startup. They've just kind of started up in terms of how they should be approaching the tech stack, and, you know, how quickly they should be moving with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, it's three elements, right? It's kind of like, first off, what are your actual objectives as a business unit in relation to the business? There's so much tech out there that can do so many fantastic things that if you approach it that way, that's all you'd be doing. So you know, you can't boil just the ocean
on that.
And so, you know, you will have for 2020 hopefully some objectives. If you don't, go build them out. And I would be amazed if any of that was go buy software, right?
Of course.
And so just accept that, okay, you need a tech stack that's geared towards you helping you achieve your objectives today. The second one is, if you've not got time to run proof of concepts, write just a one-page document on what the tech's going to do for the company, and you know, maybe stage it a little. So what will it do by month 4? What will it do by month 8? And what will it do by the end of the year?
How will it grow with the company?
Right. And if you don't do that, and you've not got time to do that, you might not have time to take the software on in the first place. And then the other one is, don't forget your prospects and your other customers, I would say, of what it is that you're trying to do with your tech. So because it's often, they can be left out of the experience, or they can be left out of what you're trying to do. And you won't be too surprised to hear from a CRO that runs a user experience software company that, you know, I'm fairly big on that. And so how are you going to ensure that whatever tech that you implement either doesn't disrupt their user experience, or ideally adds to it and improves it? So we looked at a piece of software that was around automatically responding to inbound leads, which meant in effect we could answer leads 24/7. And the theory was, that'll be great, and we'll improve the customer experience because they won't be waiting for a phone call. And unfortunately what came out was the sheer amount of languages that we operate in meant that quite often when it wasn't sure, it would default to English, and then they'd get a response in a language that maybe they weren't as comfortable in. And so we in the end, we took that piece of software out. So even when you have a plan, have a plan to operationalize it, and you focus on the user, it doesn't perhaps always go to plan. But and I think that's the other thing, you know, which is those three things I gave you, use those as measures of success, you know, 6 and 12 months in, and plan your renewal. You know, we see so many companies that, you know, when we approach about renewal of our software, they're like, oh, you know, we've not thought about that yet. And you're right. And of course, hopefully, you know, we hope that they renew, and more often than not they do. But again, you know, that your marketing tech or your sales tech, it can sometimes kind of, you know, catch you by surprise that, hey, your renewal's up in 4 weeks. Is it working?
Have we actually use this?
And so sometimes you know, you take a knee-jerk reaction either to renew just because you've not got time to even figure it out, or worse, rip it out, and all that time and effort's wasted because you weren't sure, and you know, it could be a decent amount of money.
Create that confusion. And it's interesting you said that point of, because I think what a lot of particularly, you know, early stage companies and even growing companies, they implement a software today, but they don't realize in 6 months from now that it's going to be a completely useless software because, you know, they'll have hit this business metric. Or so I think the point you made about really understanding how this is going to play a part in the stats 6 months from now is really, really critical, because like you said, it's you're just going to end up paying for softwares that are not going to be useful in the stack. So I think you've got to really understand how they're going to play a part, not just
and I would lean on the sales organization that's trying to sell to you. And if you don't get what you want from them, then maybe they're not the right organization for you. But typically salespeople, I think, naturally inclined. It's not about overselling. It's just that they're enthused about the really cool things their software can do, and they'll tend to go to that. Right, it's like, this is the 10 out of 10 version of what the future we can paint for you, but it's probably not realistic straight away. And so ask them, like, hey, in the first 6 months, what's a kind of a realistic goal for us to what most of your customers, and maybe ask to speak to references. And they're never going to put you in front of customers that have had a bad experience, but you will get a more independent view about how they operationalized it. And it's quite easy to do these days as well, with Slack and LinkedIn, and just reach out to people and say, hey, I see that you're using this software and we're thinking about it, and what do you think? And
what did you actually achieve after 3 months, not 2 years down the line when they were
right?
Yeah, makes sense. And again, something that I kind of, a question that I like, kind of finishing on, just because it's a tough question, because there's never just one answer to this, right? But it's,
oh, good.
If there was one metric, from, obviously you've come from the sales background, so if there was one metric that as an SDR, or just, I guess, as a CRO, that you really should be tracking, and this could be at any point in the funnel, right, that you just think is absolutely critical to be tracking as a growing business. Again, there's never one answer to this, but it's just, what would be that one metric for you that is just absolutely crucial that you're keeping an eye on?
Wow, I mean, that's a huge question. I mean, as a CRO, I would always say bookings, right? Because ultimately that's how you're judged. But actually, if you actually care to look at any kind of SaaS model, then they would tell you it's renewal and retention rate. If you have a really, really high retention rate, you will be able to build way more easily a much more successful business. And then, of course, if you asked if you're in seed funding, or you're at Series A, or wherever you may be on your journey, your investor will want those metrics to be good, but they might have an even more important, typically around EBITDA, or cash adjusted EBITDA. So you're right. It is tricky, and dependent on what perspective you take. It's always, again, it changes from time to time. So if you're about to make a big investment and try and double your sales team, or increase the size of your sales team 30%, then time to ramp becomes an incredibly powerful metric to measure. And if you don't know your time to ramp, go figure that out before you go
into the sales process.
Right, because people are expensive, and investing in 30% more salespeople can be a fantastic thing to do, and take your business to the next level. But if they're not actually ramped, you're really going to struggle.
Interesting. So more on the kind of actually internal Onramp and SDRs, and how quickly they can get to a suitable kind of level in terms of that go to market.
Exactly. So when we first started driving this business, my management team, we were ramping SDRs in probably 3 to 4 months,
right?
And now we're ramping in 4 to 5 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
So and that's that wasn't an overnight thing.
Of course.
But it gives us incredible confidence when we're hiring SDRs now, what that's going to mean, when they're going to kick in, what that's going to contribute to pipe, and then you can kind of you can start to do the metrics from there.
Of course. I think again, a lot of people like to focus on the number of SQLs, and these things are really important, but I think if you don't get the internal stuff right, it's going to create a lot of mess when you're trying to push more through. And
absolutely. I mean, every marketer I've ever managed, I've always said the same thing, which is, if you can ever get yourself to a place where you can confidently come to me and ask for $1 million worth of budget, then you know that you're winning, because the only way you would do that is because you would know the return on that $1 million and how you were going to go and do that. So that's always a good North Star, I think, for any marketing team.
Makes sense. Well, look, Jamie, it's been really, really awesome having you on the show. I've really enjoyed having you on. I hope you've enjoyed coming on.
I have. It's been great.
Awesome. And guys, I will see you on the next episode of the CDP Growth Show. See ya.
Thanks for having me.